Are you a woman leading in one of Canada's nonprofits and struggling with turnover on your team? Or perhaps you might be the one who's wondering if it's time to go. Then stay tuned because in today's show, we are talking to Maryann Kerr about the nonprofit turnover issue, why it's there, and what we can do about it. Welcome to the Surviving to Thriving podcast that helps women leaders in nonprofits get out of survival mode and thrive in both leadership and life. I'm your host, leadership development coach Kathy Archer, and I help women leaders enjoy impactful leadership. Maryann is the Chief Happiness Officer and CEO of her organization, the Medalist Group. She founded the Medalist Group in 2006 with the mission to create kind, collaborative, inclusive, and productive social profit workplaces. Oh, please, that's what we need. She's a true believer that the health and well-being of our workplace is directly correlated with the health and well-being of our employees. In this episode, you're going to hear us talk about what the role of leadership is, what the role of the employees is, the board is, to create the culture where employees want to stay, want to stick around, so that we're not having such high turnover in the sector. Let's transition into my conversation with Maryann. Welcome to the show, Maryann. I'm super excited to talk to you today because I know you have a wealth of information, wealth of experience, and lots to share about going forward in the nonprofit sector. So before we dive in, can you just, I did your bio, but tell everybody a little bit about you, sort of the Coles Notes version of how you got to where you are today.
Sure. Well, you know what? I always start with the fact that I'm a mom to two amazing young women because everything I do in life is dedicated to those two. So I start there. But I worked in the social profit sector for 34 years in kind of fundraising and organizational leadership roles, and mostly small to mid-sized organizations, like from a budget of $1 million up to kind of 20 million. So it's a big range, and was responsible for helping to raise $110 million. And that to me is, I feel like I can look back over that career and I feel really good about it. I feel accomplished, and there are a lot of really wonderful relationships that came as a part of that. But then I hit some bumps, right, in the last kind of 10 years of my career, maybe 8 or 9 years of my career. And I said to myself, what is happening here? Why am I having these experiences? And of course, I want to be really clear that I think anytime things go wrong, we all have a part, we all play a role in it. But there were some really significant issues with turnover in the sector. There were some significant issues with organizational culture and leadership. There are issues with governance. So when I looked back, I said, let's say I have 10 years, 15 years ahead of me to work. What do I want to do? How do I want to have the greatest impact? And so I want to work on healthy organizations. I want to help co-create healthy organizations.
And that's what you do now.
So that's what I do now.
Yeah. So do you do that like in terms of, consulting in organizations, one-to-one work with leaders?
Both.
Yeah.
My preference is not one-on-one because I'm not a coach. There are a lot of really tremendous coaches out there. Do you know any? And isn't what I do really. So I will coach within the context of an engagement. So the client has me there doing leadership team work or organizational health reviews, an audit of some sort. Then I will coach as part of the process, but it's not individual coaching so much as it is organizational coaching.
Right.
Yeah.
And so over your own career, and we'll probably touch on some of your career stories as we continue to talk, and the work that you've done with organizations, you've really noticed, and we all have, let's be honest, those of us in the sector have noticed there's a lot of turnover. Yeah. And there's an issue or several issues here. Now you're writing a book on this. So tell us about the book.
I am writing a book. Well, first, I feel really proud about the book because Jim Hilborn came to me from Civil Sector Press And he said, we have an issue with turnover in the sector. We need someone to write a book. Would you write this book? And I hadn't been thinking about it at all. And I wasn't even sure I was capable of writing a book. I'm almost done. I'm about 2/3 of the way there. So I'm excited about it because for me, this is a book. I said to him, well, how will we change the world, Jim, if I write this book? Because, and we thought a lot about that. And I think the book is really going to pique people's curiosity on the wide range of topics that are related to organizational health, to turnover, to culture, to governance, to leadership, right? There is so much, but this one is written with the charitable sector, the social profit sector in mind. So it's very specific to the work we do. And our work is nuanced. It is not the same as working in a for-profit organization. So I really feel like it's a niche, which means that, we'll probably sell 10 or 12 books, but that's okay, because I think for emerging leaders in the sector, it will really be helpful, and it will lead them in other directions than they might have otherwise gone.
Yes. And you're going to give us a little sneak peek into the book today. So I just want to, talk to, before we dive into sort of what you've discovered so far and what you're putting into the book around this turnover in the nonprofit sector. I think there's a number of different things, from frontline turnover to, middle management and then upper management. And there's so many diversities around, is it a children's program, or is it a women's shelter, or is it, like you say, there's so much going on. But what I experienced and what I hear from my clients is just the pain of it. Like,
Mhm.
it's hard, whether you're the one who's, leaving an organization, or whether you're experiencing it with your staff, it is really hard. Can you speak to that for yourself or for what you've experienced? The pain of turnover?
Oh, for sure. I mean, the first time I got fired, Kathy, and when we talk about turnover, it's not always voluntary, right?
No.
Um, and even when it's voluntary, sometimes it's very difficult to leave a place, right? But the first time I got fired, I've been fired 3 times. I say it proudly now, but it took me a long time to get
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
It was a hugely traumatic experience. My whole family had moved to a new town for this job. I'd been there a year when we made that move. My kids had never lived anywhere else. And so we took them out of schools, all of that disruption.
Yeah.
And as soon as we moved, everything started to change within the workplace. And it was a bullying environment. It's as simple as that. And, I am, as you know, not a wallflower by any means. I have a lot of confidence in terms of the work I do because I know that I'm good at the work that I do. So to find myself in this situation where I'd be in meetings and there would be quite literally sweat pouring down my back. Okay, like I can't, I know that's gross, but that's the absolute truth. I would be shaking. It was just the most horrible experience. And then being fired, of course, is a whole trauma in and of itself. And so, yeah, so I think that I was able with time and a lot of coaching and help and support to separate out what was about me, right? Because you take it personally, you figure it's all about you. It eats away at your confidence, it eats away at your self-esteem. And as the sole breadwinner at my house, I was terrified, right? Truly terrified about how my family was going to survive this. So yeah, it's really, really tough. And I think organizationally, there were things that could have happened to avoid it because it was a job I loved. I loved that job. I mean, I really did. I didn't like my manager, but
Yeah.
I sure loved the job.
Yeah. It's interesting as you were talking, a couple things. So I've had some real peaks in my career and some real valleys as well. And so just as you were talking about the sweat pouring off you, it takes me back to those times when my work culture sucked and I was the leader. So I certainly had a role in that. But the tension and the stress that ate away at my body. And I remember sitting in meetings feeling very much like my stomach was about to, like, whoa. And
Yeah.
I was ready to throw up and I didn't know how to handle it. And I left the room crying. And, there was times that it was so bad. So I think that's one of the things that we have to recognize. And again, I think that's where coaching comes in and therapy for some people and stuff is it is traumatic at times, the stuff that's going on, and it takes time to heal.
Yeah. Well, and I think we have an epidemic of mental health issues, crisis in this country, and a large part of that is coming from the workplace, right? It's not that people are
Yes.
bringing mental health issues into the workplace; they're actually being created by the
By the
workplace.
workplace.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it's interesting that we talk so much about mental health and the stigma, but we're not doing a great job of taking care of people at work.
Yeah. Okay, so tell us the main components. Why is turnover so high in the nonprofit sector? What have you learned?
Yeah. Well, the number one issue with turnover is managers, right? So I did some survey work a year ago, I guess it was. 85% of Canadian workers are disengaged. Of those 85%, 70% blame their manager. So it is the number one issue in the workplace.
And
Yeah.
we don't work for the company, we work for our
Yeah,
manager.
exactly. And we've all heard that, right? We don't leave a job, we leave our manager. Yeah. So that's one. For that manager to exist and be that person to us requires an organizational culture that supports it, right? So we call them toxic workplaces or toxic cultures, but that is a big piece of it. So it's creating an organizational culture that causes people to feel valued and respected and have a sense of belonging, right? That culture is really a missing piece, and I think in our social profit sector even more so than the corporate sector. I truly believe that.
Okay, I just want to back up for a moment because I
Yeah.
don't want leaders to feel like they're the problem or they're to blame, but I
Yeah.
want them to understand their role. So there's
Yeah.
a connection between why you lead the way you do or why your supervisor leads the way they do to the culture. Just
Right.
hone in on that just a little bit more for us.
Sure. So let's talk about micromanaging managers. Okay. Micromanaging is a form of harassment. And what we say generally is we go, oh, that's just Kathy's style. She's a bit of a micromanager. She worries about everything. That's just how Kathy is. And we as leaders in organizations let Kathy get away with it, right? Instead of looking at the impact it's having on people. So if you have a culture, if you work carefully on culture, which a lot of people struggle with, and I'll talk about it in a bit, but because they don't know where to start generally, right? If you're not paying attention to culture, those kinds of things just keep happening, and nobody even knows. Nobody's looking at turnover. There's no employee surveys happening around morale, or if they are, people go, yeah, we don't really trust that this is anonymous, right? There's not a lot of trust in that organization. So culture is what allows poor management to happen, and a culture that is working effectively is ensuring that managers are trained and supported and developed to be good at what they do, right? Rather than, yeah, sorry, go.
Well, I just think the first time I heard culture when I was a new leader, I'm like, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Like, what is culture? And I think it's still kind of a weird word. So,
Yeah.
what do you mean by culture?
Okay, well, so the easy answer is it's everything. So there is a definition by two authors, Kennedy and Deal, and they say culture is the way we do things here. So it impacts everything. It's the environment. It's where I sit in my little cubby versus the corner office that the CEO has. It's the way someone greets you when you walk in. It's policies and procedures.
It's how late meetings start, even though the start time is XYZ.
Absolutely. It's equity, diversity, and inclusion, right? It's there are there are 9 or 10 depending upon which way or which author you believe or which consultant you follow, elements to culture, and so it's everything. It's related to everything that you do and everything that you see and everything that you touch. But it all comes down, if I were to define it as simply as possible, it's how does that employee feel at work? How do they feel? So, if we say that ours is a respectful culture, right? But that
Feel
employee,
respected.
right, then you are not meeting that, right? And all of the research points to really very simply that people want to be valued, they want to be respected, and they want to belong. That's it, It's very simple, but it takes effort and it
Yeah.
takes paying attention, right? A lot of attention.
Do you ever feel like you are stuck in survival mode and you don't know how to get out? Or you're not sure if you're in survival mode or how bad it is? If you head over to kathyarcher.com/thrive, and I'll put the link in the show notes, you can get a quick worksheet to see where you land on the surviving to thriving continuum. How bad is it? Am I really stuck in survival mode, or am I in the middle? And what do I need to do to get to thriving? You will also get the 5 mistakes you do not want to make as you plan your way out of survival mode and into thriving. Again, you'll find that in the link in the notes, kathyarcher.com/thrive. So, culture, leadership, and there was one more,
Governance.
governance.
So, and I think this is even more important in our sector than it is, again, corporately. I think corporately, boards are paying more attention to culture, right? And to the impact leadership has, and to, they're getting reports back on how their employees are feeling. They recognize there's a return, a financial return on investment in employee engagement. So, but in our sector, I think we went through this phase where we really believed it was Carver. Do you remember the Carver model of governance? So, over here we had the board and they were all about strategy and forward thinking and should have nothing at all to do with operations. And we created such a division between governance and operations, or strategic thinking and operations, that boards stopped knowing what was going on. And that to me is the biggest failure, because as the board, you're owning this organization on behalf of the people being served. If you don't know what's happening on an operational level, period, end of stop. I don't know what else to say. You just must. You absolutely must.
Yeah.
And if you're only talking to the CEO and a couple of members maybe of a leadership team, you're not getting a fulsome picture, right?
So, there's extremely high turnover in nonprofits.
Yeah.
We know it has to do with governance, leadership, and the culture.
Yeah.
What do we do about it?
Yeah. So the place to start, and I think I heard this amazing seminar through an organization called Excellence Canada, a not-for-profit organization, Dr. Adam Stower, who talked about thinking about organizational culture like a Rubik's Cube. I wish I had one to show you. And he said, if you think about that cube all messed up in the different colors everywhere, right? The journey to a healthy organizational culture is the same. It's getting from scrambled cube to an aligned cube.
And that
right?
doesn't happen easily.
It doesn't happen easily, and it never really ends, because as soon somebody's gonna, and you got to do right. You got to keep on it, right? So the number one issue folks have is, where do I start? I feel muddled. I feel overwhelmed, discombobulated. There's so much to do. Where do I begin? And like any journey that starts with a single step, that single step is about assessing the current environment and where you are today. And there are so many tools out there. Excellence Canada has one. The nonprofit employer of choice is a very good one, very inexpensive. And these are tools that we use in organizations to gather the wisdom in the organization, to say to the staff, what is happening on all of these various markers, help us to understand where the organization is and where we want it to get to. So that's the first step.
Awareness.
And then, right? And once you have that assessment,
yeah,
everything else will fall and follow, because you'll know where you need to focus and what you need to do. And there are people in organizations today who love this kind of work, but it may not be their core job. But ask you within your organization, do you want to work on a culture committee, an internal culture club, and let's do this work together as a team. And it's a beautiful process to go through, because people are aligned and developing and co-creating a vision for the future.
Whose job is it to kickstart that?
Well, you know what? It's a really good question. I think part of the issue is I want to simply say that it's the CEO or the leadership team or a VP of HR. I think that's a kind of obvious answer. But sometimes those people are so busy, they're not really even seeing what's happening in an organization. So, how much social capital you have makes a big difference to whether you'll be heard. But I think anyone at any level in an organization can see if there are struggles happening, can see if there's toxicity, and can try to use their social capital to make a change. And so ultimately it needs to be led by the CEO and the leadership team, but sometimes they're just not paying attention, and sometimes they're part of the problem.
I have two questions. Describe social capital. What do you mean by social
Well,
capital?
social capital is, if you've only been in an organization for a year or two, even in an organization that has, staff that have been there for 10 or 15 years, they have developed social capital, right? So they know the ins and outs. They have a group, not necessarily a clique, right? But a group of people who support their point of view, who they know well enough, because everything comes down to relationships in an organization, right? So they've got well-developed relationships where they can say, yeah, I can go to Maryann and ask her about this because I trust her. I know she trusts me. I know that both of us are working for the betterment of the organization. And I can say to her, there's this toxicity that's happening in the organization within this department. How do we fix it? What can we do? Right.
So my second question is,
Yeah.
what if you are, a team leader, a coordinator, a program manager, something down the hierarchy?
Yeah.
Your boss, your leadership team is the issue.
Yeah.
Two-part question.
Yeah.
How do I influence upwards is part one of the question. And then part two is, what if I just ignore them? Can I just work on the culture of my own little 6-person team?
Yeah. Well, those are big questions. So first I'm going to do the last one first, because I think you can, right? And there are, within bigger organizations especially, there are subcultures, right? And they are a necessary part of an organization. And so if I think of a large fundraising organization, the fundraising team may have a different culture than the communications team or the program delivery team. But there is still, in a high functioning, healthy organization, there is still an overall culture that they feed into, and that is reflected in those subcultures, right? The problem is, if you have a great subculture and the rest of the organization is toxic, or much of the rest of the organization is toxic, that won't help anyone. Because at the end of the day, what happens is someone over here says, wow, I'd really rather work on the fundraising team because look at how much fun they have every day, or wow, they get Friday afternoons off, or whatever it is, right? They'll see it as somehow, it doesn't move the whole organization forward. So it depends. So it can happen anywhere. When the problem is at the leadership level of the organization, it is tough if you don't have the social capital to make a difference. And I think that is the critical component. I have had so many people in the last 2 years ask me this exact question: what can I do? And it's at such a senior level that their feeling is the only recourse they have is to go to the board. Now, I have been a board member and had staff come to me about an organization and leadership. And I have also been in organizations where I wanted to go to the board, right? I haven't gone to the board as an employee because I'd had the experience of being the board member. So I think at times you are stuck. I'm going to be honest, at times there is, if you risk going to the board, because it is a risk that you take, you may very likely find yourself unemployed, right? So sometimes the only recourse is to move on. And
that was my next question. How do I know when it's time to move on?
Well, and that's part of the reason we have so much turnover. Yeah. It's because too often people come to that place, and it's the reason why leadership is the number one issue, number one thing we need to work on here, right? they come to that place and they go, this is a no-win situation for me. There is nowhere here for me to go. So I think it's such a personal issue. And I think the question you ask, if you think if you did any reading about Julie Payette and the Governor General, and people were talking about driving to work and sitting in their cars and crying before they went in, before they could gather at the strength.
Or at coffee breaks or lunch, like,
right.
Yeah.
Hellish. So in every way, that's time to go. But at the same time, there are practical concerns. You may not be able to afford to go. You may not have the option of another job readily available in your line of work. I mean, it is really complex. And that's the reason why it's so important that we treat our employees better. Because the epidemic of mental health in this country, the high incidence use rate, whatever the right term is, on antidepressants, the high rate of alcoholism, these things are highly related to what's happening at work. I interviewed people a couple of years ago who made comments like, yeah, the culture really sucks, but you know what? I go home at the end of the day and I have a couple of glasses of wine and I just leave it at the office.
But you don't.
No, they don't. They really don't. And you cannot, and in our sector particularly, we do this work because we care so much about the world and about fixing something, helping.
Well, and the other part of it is many of the people that come into this sector come in because they had issues. So, if you're in a women's shelter, you maybe come from an abusive background, or, you were in the child protection system growing up. So now you're working in the group home or whatever. So you have your own bag of issues already. Right. And so that just complicates the sector. And like you said, we're so underpaid. So if I quit my job, my kids don't get fed, let's be honest, or a single mom, or, there's so many issues. So that brings me to the next question. Sometimes the leadership is not taking responsibility. They're not seeing it. Their head's in the sand. What's the role of the sector?
Mm-hmm. Well, I just want to touch a little bit on what you said about, people coming into the sector who have their own trauma, right? Because I think often, and when you're often people who are bullies in the workplace and who harass others in the workplace are actually playing out their own trauma in some way, right? And you see that a lot also on social media when people get really intensely upset about something. It's often coming from a place of personalized trauma or vicarious trauma or whatever. So I think that's a really important part of the work here. I think the sector has a responsibility to talk about it, to shine a light on it, and to do better. So, I keep hearing that we're building back better, and I hope that's true. And I think part of that is only going to happen if we have these tough conversations in organizations, if boards start to really pay attention. I interviewed some folks, and I'm not going to say who yet, but I interviewed some really amazing, great leaders who are getting this right in the sector. And when I ask about boards, what they say is, as CEO, I am measured in part by how well my staff is feeling. So they are being surveyed. This one was a staff of several hundred people. They're being surveyed, and and there's an element of 360 and reviewing and so on to say, if this group of people are not feeling valued, respected, and a sense of belonging,
I got to jump in. I got to jump in because, I'm just like, and yet we're told to shut our emotions off. You just said feeling. We need to know that our staff are feeling. And yet in organizations, we talk more about what they do. How many clients do you serve? How much money did you make? It's the things we can tick off. Even though we're a nonprofit world, charity sector, we don't talk about feelings a lot. Like, how are you feeling today? How are you feeling with your workload? Not how many more clients can you take on, but what's the impact in your body, your emotions? And so that's a lot of the work that I do is around emotional intelligence.
I mean, I'm so happy that you brought that up. And it is, I use a tool called the emotional culture deck in order to help co-create culture. And it's all about, let's take a leadership team who said, that they're doing the good work. They're co-creating a healthy culture. They say we want people to feel valued, respected, and a sense of belonging. You then have to take that and say, what behaviors, right? First, how do I want Kathy to feel when she leaves? Yes. So I want Kathy to feel happy. I want her to feel engaged. I want her to feel involved. And then what behaviors do I have to undertake? What do I actually have to do in order for those feelings to be true for the staff? Yes. So we dive deep into emotion in the development of culture, because even just the words like respected, to me, if you were to yell at me or raise your voice even a little bit, I would feel disrespected.
Yeah.
But for other people and in different industries, that's just an expression of passion. Yeah. And it's okay. Right. And so there are so many ways that plays out in the workplace. But I used to always say, my work is about creating workplaces where you can bring your whole self to work, where you can laugh, you can cry, you can do whatever you need to do, feel the full range of human emotion at work. Right.
Well, and that's often what I'll ask people. So they'll come to me for I have this issue with this team person. They're driving me nuts. How do I fix them? And I'm like, well, okay. But one of the questions I often ask is, okay, you're going into a tough conversation with them. How do you want them to feel at the end of that conversation? Not what agenda items do you want to bring to that conversation, and not what you want to cover. Yeah. How do you want them to feel? Because I just wrote a blog post about this. If you want them to walk out of that meeting and say, boy, is she ever a blah, you can accomplish that really easily. But if you want them to walk out of that meeting and say, that was really tough, but I feel like she understood and supported me.
Yes.
That's two completely different conversations.
Yes. Yeah. And it all comes down to, again, relationships, right? And really knowing the people that you work with. I'm a big fan of Patrick Lencioni's work. He did most of his and still does a lot of his work in faith-based organizations. And to me, it's very much about an expression of kind of servant leadership, right? And being in service to your teams rather than the other way around. And so, yeah, I really care about the people that are working with me every day. I do, you do. I think there are lots of people who feel that way. It just gets crushed out of us by organizations that want to measure the success of an organization by numbers. How many were served? How many dollars came in? How many times did we get our names in the newspaper? How many opportunities to speak did the CEO get? How many awards did she win? Right? That's how we measure organizations, instead of measuring them around, how do the people who work here feel?
So that I have a membership site. So I have a membership site for women in the nonprofit sector. And I just dropped a course in there a month ago around a template for supervision with your employee. And one of the things that I created was a one-pager about your employee. And I love that you started our whole call with, I'm a mom, because that's my world as well. I'm a mom. I have 5 granddaughters. I have a dog, a husband of 30 some years. As I knock my computer over, that's me first. Yeah. And so one of the things that I put on this one page about your employee is, who is this person? Right. Like, they came to Canada 3 years ago. They have a dog. They're a single mom. They have a dream of running a bakery. Like, what is it? Do you know about this person? Yeah. Because they're a person first.
Yeah. Patrick Lencioni and the Table Group have a little exercise called the Personal Histories exercise. If anyone Googles it, I'm pretty sure the 3 questions will just come up. Yeah. Tool to sit around to any team and ask these questions. And they are questions like, there are 3 of them, but it's who were you when you were 8 years old? Like, what did you dream of being when you grew up? What's a kind of defining moment that happened when you were a young person? And, how many siblings? That's it. How many siblings? Where are you in the birth order? Yeah. And it's amazing how, I think that's the right 3 questions. It's close anyway. It's amazing how getting to who we were as a young person, how much it tells us. And I have facilitated session over session with those 3 questions that I still struggle with every time. I've never done it once where I haven't had somebody cry.
Oh,
I love that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah,
right?
totally.
And then to watch, like the privilege in this work is to then watch the rest of the team. Recently it's been on Zoom, but in person, even on Zoom, to watch the rest of the group envelop them, care for them,
Mm.
nurture them, steward them, whatever the words are, right? You see the team, and you really see who they are when you facilitate those questions, because are they comfortable with someone else's emotion, right? Are
Oh,
they?
so you just brought up a story that I'll probably cry telling. So I worked for an organization for almost 20 years. And it's funny because towards the end of that time, I was supervising over a larger geographical area. And so we started having not Zoom calls, but conference calls for staff meetings. So, I had a couple people at different sites, and then in our office, I was in my office and I had a couple people in their offices, but we were all on the phone. And it was the day that I had let my team know. They didn't know that I was leaving. And so I announced this over the phone and I'm crying. And all of a sudden my door opens and here in comes the rest of the team that were in my office. And so like there's this group hug happening in my office and the other people on their phone are going, "Hello, where'd you guys go?"
That's amazing.
But that's what you're talking about, is that
Yeah.
that connection. They knew enough. And yeah, that was, so I'll wipe my tears away now.
They know that, it's about moving beyond, even I think with Zoom meetings and such over the last year, we sort of have had this sense that we know people better because we can see inside their
Yes, yes.
offices. Like I can tell you right now, my office looks neat and tidy. But if I turned my computer just an inch in either direction, you would see the chaos that is actually my office. And I think the truth is that people believe they know more just because we're seeing in, but not
But we're
necessarily
not seeing
true.
in here.
Right, exactly. It's not about what you do, it's about who you are on
Yeah.
the inside out. And all leadership and culture work is really about coming from the inside out. And it's funny because I've been talking a lot about, I've noticed the word authenticity being used an awful lot lately. People claiming, self-proclaiming to be authentic, right? And it kind of bugged me because I'm like, well, there's a big difference between saying that you're authentic and actually being authentic as a leader. And you can't be an authentic leader if you're not an authentic person, right? If you haven't done the work, and always do the work. It's not a done, checkbox kind of thing. It's a continual process to be looking inside and learning and growing.
Well, and the other thing, and I know we need to wrap up because our listeners are like, "Oh my God," because we could listen to this conversation forever. But that's one of the things that I often talk about, is integrity is one of the number one things we look for in our leader.
Yeah.
But you cannot be honest once, twice, three times, and think you're seen as an honest leader, because you could be honest for 6 months,
Yeah.
but one little piece of dishonesty will blow that out of the water.
Yeah.
And so you're right.
Absolutely.
This is an ongoing process and people need to see that it happens continually. It's
Yeah.
not what you say, it's what you do and how that makes people feel.
Yeah. I love it. Thank you for saying that.
So, turnover in the nonprofit sector, number one thing people need to do?
The number one thing they need to do, is read my book when it comes out.
Yes, please. Yes.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that in a
Um,
second.
I'm going to put it in the hands of board members, and I'm going to say you need to be checking to see what your turnover rate is, checking in with your employees, and doing the work to pay attention to culture.
And the book is scheduled to come out
in the late spring, early summer.
Yes. And do you have a title yet?
We don't. I'd love to hear people. I have two potentials. We jokingly call it "Get Sticky" right now. In other words, sticky, so people want to stay. And I've also sometimes I just call it that, stay, right? How to create the kind of organization where people want to stay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Titles are hard.
Thank you so much for this conversation. It has been wonderful. Where can people find you?
On LinkedIn. It's Maryann Kerr on LinkedIn. Please follow, please connect. And if I can be of service, it would be my pleasure to do so.
And I'll make sure that the links are in below. But you post almost daily, beautifully written, thought-provoking, engaging conversations. So people should really follow you on LinkedIn, engage in a conversation with you, and
Thank you.
make sure that they are continuing so they do see the book when it comes out. And, if you're not a board member or the leader, perhaps you could just buy it and leave it on the, coffee table in the office or something. Send it out as Christmas gifts.
Yeah, or buy 10 copies and do a book club in your organization.
Yes,
That's really smart.
absolutely, absolutely. I've done that with my book in some organizations where,
Have you?
we all dive in one organization and cover it, because that's a good way to change the culture of an organization.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's been such a pleasure talking with you, Kathy.
Thank you so much, Maryann. And again, we'll put all the links in the notes so that everybody has the chance to follow.
Thank you.
If you found today's episode helpful, then you are going to love the training library. Many women leaders in nonprofits wish that they had a coach or a mentor to help them, but they don't believe that they or their organization can afford it. Oh, but you can. Inside of the Training Library membership site, you will not only get access to affordable and easily accessible ongoing personal and professional development training, you will also have access to a leadership coach at your fingertips. That way, when you hit those inevitable challenges that leadership will bring your way, you'll have both the resources and the support to navigate your way through them with confidence, composure, and while keeping your integrity intact. To find out more, head to kathyarcher.com/library. If you are enjoying the show, I'd love it if you could leave me a comment or a review on iTunes or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thanks for listening. Go make the rest of your day awesome.